feel like it's time we move on to our final topic of the day.
This will be a fun
Something
one.
that I just came out that me and Phoenix were actually able to go out and watch is Dragon Ball Superhero. So what a weird name.
Yeah.
But I'll let you go first because I don't. I want to hear your thoughts first. I'm
Okay.
nice.
So I will preface this by saying I am more positive on Dragon Ball Super in general, I think, than really you are. I know you haven't really watched much of it. You've seen like the movie portions of it a little bit.
Hmm.
And to be fair, like I did not like the majority of the first half of Super. The stuff that was, wrapped up into those first few movies, the Frieza stuff and the original Beerus stuff, I didn't care for any of that. Honestly, the stuff I really liked in Super was the Trunks, Goku, Rose stuff. I don't know if you know anything about that story arc at all. That's
Hmm.
actually, it feels more like Dragon Ball Z. It's a lot darker. And I thought that was a really solid arc. And then they have like a tournament at the end of Super, which no stakes. It was just a bunch of fight scenes. So I didn't care about that. So really, I guess honestly, there's about a third of Super I actually really really like, but it was good. So I took that positivity and tried to roll it over into this. I think also it's just I haven't watched or been involved in any Dragon Ball related content in so long, and just I forgot this was even coming to theaters. So I was like, that seems like a fun thing. Go hang
If
out in the
you
theater, watch the DB whatever on the screen. It'll be a good time.
if you don't know, I'm a huge Dragon Ball fan. It's my favorite anime. I
Mm.
have Dragon Ball, covered the entire original show so far. So I just wanted to throw that back.
Best videos on the channel. If you haven't watched them, you need a quick summary on Dragon Ball, go check those out. Like and subscribe whenever it gets doing Dragon Ball Z,
Oh,
which should start tomorrow.
duh.
See, better at
Doing a
this
better
than me.
job, of advertising for me.
I know. Anyway, so I came into this one to be really positive. I don't even know why I was so positive because, honest, when I think back to the last few
If
Dragon
it
Ball
wasn't for you, I
movies,
probably wouldn't have watched it. I wasn't going to go out of my way, but you wanted to, so.
yeah, well, it just seemed fun, and I think I just wanted to have fun at the theaters. 'Cause I haven't been in a while, but
Hmm.
anyways, when I really think back on it though, I didn't care for the Broly movie that came out not too long ago.
People were super positive on it from what I've seen, and
They were, I
I
didn't.
was very middling,
I think
but it's
because I
fine.
just didn't like the change they did with Broly. He was a completely different character. I mean, and I think I had a hard time reconciling that to me, like for what Broly was back in Z versus who Broly was in
I
Super.
looked it up too because I thought in this movie Broly sounded weird. So, but apparently that actor is like they removed him, so it was
Oh,
a different.
he's
He's
got some
having some sort
stuff
of
going
sexual
on.
misconduct stuff
Yeah.
happening,
Oh, I don't remember his name.
allegations or
Yeah,
something against him.
that's a whole nother thing. But
Yeah, I just thought he
anyways,
sounded weird when the movie. I'm like, that doesn't sound like Broly. I don't know.
yeah.
But go ahead.
So, anyways, I wanted to come into this movie positive. And now, I haven't seen any footage of this, no trailers or nothing. I'd seen some stills, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. That looks cool. Man, I knew there were like, Piccolo had a new transformation or something. Like, all right, that'll be whatever. I did not realize it, and I immediately took a step back when I'm like, oh, this is all CG. I thought they were just
You said that in
initially
the theater. You were like, "Is the whole movie gonna be like this?" And I was like, "I
because
think
I know they've
so."
mixed it in the past. Like that's a pretty common thing. Like to cut on certain animation segments, especially like vehicles and stuff. It's pretty common for anime to do some CG for certain moments of it and kind of blend it with the 2D. And then when I saw the character models and saw that that was all CG, I was just like, what? So it took me a while to even try to acclimate to that.
I did not think boded well or bode.
Bodes well. Or so
I didn't think it
bode.
bode.
That's a weird phrasing for it.
I did. I did not think it transitioned well into fighting. I thought it made the fight scenes look kind of bad, in my opinion, because
Yeah.
Dragon Ball is all about speed and all that stuff, and it just looked.
And we talked about that a little bit. I'll tell you, so I will say this, like, especially when I was able to kind of look and, like, mentally pause the movie at certain spots, the CG isn't bad. And in, like, still shots, it honestly looks like it's hand drawn. Like, they did a really good job, I think, with the outlines, the texturing of it. Like, there are moments I think it actually looks pretty good. It's the moment to moment, like, slow movements. Like, the broad strokes, I think, are fine. But when you're watching the characters, like, talk to each other or do something, it just feels a little off. It does
A
not
bit uncanny.
feels a little uncanny because they do. It's hard to act like the 2D animation felt more real. but it did. This felt like video game characters talking. Not that they were
Mm.
bad looking video game characters, but it felt like a video game. And to your,
It felt like a PS2 Budokai
I
game
won't
at
say
some point in
PS2.
the
Like
movie.
honestly, I think like if I was
PS3.
honestly, if I was playing, like, I didn't play the Dragon Ball Z Kakarot game, but, like, if I was playing a current gen game and those are the graphics I had, I probably would have been pretty happy with it. Because I don't think they were on their own bad. I just don't think they translated well into the action, like you were saying, of DBZ. Like, we were talking about it some. What gave Dragon Ball animation, especially in the fight scenes, that speed was the fact that they took shortcuts in their animation. Like, they wouldn't show every single frame of a character being punched at high speed. There would be
Hmm.
big jumps or like missing frames where there's characters here, characters here, characters here, zigzag lines everywhere. And I know that seems like a cheap cop out when you think about it, but it added to the sense of speed, of like this frenetic kind of tension that was taking place in the scene. When you have actual 3D models where you can easily animate every single frame of movement, those extra frames actually make it feel slower. At least that's how I kind of anticipated it. Now, and sometimes they did a really good job adding some extra like animated like motion blurs, or some of those like phasing kind of sequences. So it's not that they did a terrible job by any means. I just feel like something was lacking as opposed to the 2D animation that we're used to. I wish they would have done like a mix between them, like we've seen in the past. I didn't like the straight CG, so that was strike one for me.
Honestly, all of the stuff you're talking about, I would have been able to forgive, but I'm gonna move on to my
Hmm.
least favorite part about this movie was the dialogue and the humor. This
Yeah.
was probably the least entertained I've been by a Dragon Ball movie in a long time. I remember mentioning it to you in the theater. I was like, I think Bio Broly is worse, but this is right there with like the Bio Broly. That's my least favorite DBZ movie. So
Yeah.
this movie's humor was so bad. I don't remember laughing at any joke.
Only
All of the
one
stuff.
for me. The part where he was driving the ship and Pan was
Oh, and they
like, "Why are you
mentioned
doing so
Piccolo.
bad?" Because that, at least for me, was a callback to Z. Because they were talking about how
Mhm.
Piccolo couldn't drive. He's like, "Well, I never got my license," and that's true. In the DBZ little side episode, where he was learning how to drive, he never got his license. So I thought that was
Oh,
cute.
there was another joke. The henchman of the Red Ribbon guy, when he's driving in the car, he has like a rounded out space in the rooftop for his
Oh
hair.
man,
I saw that and I was like,
yeah, but that was also just kind of like goofy. What I don't know.
it
No, I agree with you overall about the humor.
was extremely corny. I actually thought it was kind of cringy at some points.
Yeah.
The whole the whole Beerus like fawning over the one character that I'd never heard of. I was like,
To be
I
fair, like Japanese Dragon Ball, if you go back to like original Dragon Ball, you've got some weird pervy interactions. Like Roshi and Bulma, there's some weird interactions there in original Japanese Dragon Ball. There's some in DBZ. The American
well,
version, they remove a lot of it, but
well it felt more on brand back then. I guess because that anime was the time for me when it was made. Like this being made in 2022,
everybody's a little more PC and
everyone's
just
a little more PC and I'll be honest, it just
it
it
felt
feels like
uncomfortable to me. I didn't like
yes,
it.
it feels like nowadays this Dragon Ball, not anime, but Dragon Ball is it feels very tailored towards a large demographic now.
Hmm.
I feel like that's part of the reason you could attribute that to any other IP, but like I feel like that's why Dragon Ball and Super were or Dragon Ball and Z were so great is just I don't know, maybe it feels like cuz it's like a startup a startup thing, who's it's artistically free and it just I don't know it.
Maybe. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to kind of even draw a comparison to. I don't know.
I mean, it's tough to put my finger on. I just felt
I know what you're
this felt
saying.
very
And I guess my thing is I'm not sure exactly why Super it does hit the tone that it does right now because it doesn't throughout the entire show too. This feels almost like a different Super to me too. Like I hate to
really
almost
okay.
and now to be fair, Super does have some moments like this. Like there are some tones where Super does not feel like Z the whole time. The parts I like about Super usually lean towards the more Z feeling stuff, but This movie felt like the worst parts of Super to me, like all kind of shoved into one thing. So it's like they're doubling down on the stuff that I'm not a big fan of. They had like weird fourth wall breaks, which seemed out of place for Dragon Ball.
Yeah, a little crazy about Piccolo. Like, I think he looked at the screen and said something to us at one point, and I was like,
Yeah, unless we misinterpreted that, it felt like a fourth wall break. But yeah, the writing, dialogue, like it's hard to say if it was. I don't know if I want to say it was bad because I'd almost have to go back. I don't want to act like all the dialogue in DBZ was great because there was plenty of cheesy stuff in DBZ, but I know because went back and rewatched some episodes not too long ago, and I was like, that's a little cringy, that's a little whatever. But we watched a different time. It was a different time. We have nostalgia kind of wrapped up into it, so we interpret that differently. Here, it feels worse, but I'm not sure if that's because I don't have the nostalgia kind of painting over this particular Dragon Ball incarnation the way I do with Z. So I don't know. I'm hesitant to really draw a comparison saying this is bad Dragon Ball writing or bad Dragon Ball dialogue. It might be, but I'm not saying we haven't had anything just as
I
bad
even think
before.
that's a fair comparison, comparing it to old Dragon Ball. I mean, I think if you compare this to like writing on My Hero Academia, I feel like
Yeah, but I
that's
wouldn't.
better writing and more entertaining, and there's actual jokes in there, and that's more modern.
But those two animes are so different from one another. Like they're different. Like I mean, that's probably an unpopular opinion, but I think a lot of the writing in My Hero could be better than some of the stuff in Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball comes across pretty contrived. It's all about getting to the fight. Um,
Well, that's fair. I mean, I'm not going to argue against that.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is Dragon Ball Z, Z particularly, Dragon Ball, you could argue a little differently. Z has always been about building to the next fight. Now, they've done a better
Old school
job.
Dragon Ball is definitely more reliant on the narrative. Like the narrative does mean a bit more. I'll agree with you
Yeah.
there.
Z, less so. It was about getting to these big powerhouse moments for a new transformation, new whatever. Not that they didn't have story arcs and what on between. Some of them were really solid, but I think that was the main kind of push. This, I don't know. In general, if I'm not comparing, I didn't like the writing in it. I will agree with that. In this new movie, writing was meh. The plot, I didn't think was all that engaging. For the first, like, 3/4 of the movie, I didn't care about where we were getting at. It just felt a little forced.
I remember saying it in the theater, man. The only parts about this movie that I get a rise out of was all of the opening stuff that showed like modern renditions of some of the events that happened in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. That was the only stuff where I was like, yeah. Yeah. They were showing like some
Yeah.
of the stuff that happened between Goku and Red Ribbon and all that stuff. That was so cool. And
I think
um,
the whole time, what kind of kept me trying to stay positive was I knew that there was a new cell that was popping up. He was like, that was like the big bad. I'm like, okay, I could let go of most of this trash writing, most of this bad CG, if we get a cool cell, reincarnation at the end of it. Because once again, a lot of other stories in Dragon Ball, the writing's been meh, but you get to the cool fight, and I would have been okay with that.
talking
This
about we got a big kaiju battle at the end of your Dragon Ball movie. You didn't like that?
this was the worst route they could have taken Cell. Like when you think about Cell as a villain, he is one of the more calculating, intelligent enemy.
Very charismatic.
Very
Very
charismatic. He's very
charismatic.
narcissistic. Like there's a lot of personality and character to Cell. The Cell they brought here is literally just a giant monster. He never says a word. He just yells and grunts the entire time. There is no strategy to his actions, no motivation to it. He's just this big powerhouse thing. And it's just the most wasted character. Like why make him Cell? Make him anything else, and I probably wouldn't have cared nearly as much. Really, that's almost more how I would have expected like a Broly, like just a
Yeah.
roided out
Oh yeah.
rage Broly. Like that could have made more sense. But this was just a giant red Cell, and not even necessarily a better version of him because this one had a built-in weakness.
Yeah.
I don't know. He
That's
felt
why
like
his name is. We said in the movie. That's why his name is Cell. Is because if you don't eliminate him down to the very last cell, he can regenerate. That's what makes him. That's what makes him so powerful.
yeah,
And another reason why that makes him so powerful in Dragon Ball Z is because he has the anatomy of a Saiyan. Every time a Saiyan is brought to near death or is
he gets
beaten down
stronger. Yeah.
badly, when he regenerates, he becomes stronger. That's why Cell was so hard to defeat. Is because every time they'd almost eliminate him, he'd come back even more powerful. And this was,
This one
like
has
you
had a
said,
built-in off switch in them, so
yeah, it
um,
was very disappointing. And another thing that that could be very intriguing about bringing back a Cell character, especially with this whole movie revolving around Gohan
mhm.
uh, becoming what he was before, taking back the mantle of being the world's strongest or the hero of
Right.
Earth, is they wasted that whole possible interaction that you could have had of Cell. Like that's part of the intrigue is seeing Cell.
Like Cell would have
Um,
wanted to have revenge on Gohan. That could have been this
yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing. I know this was like a new Cell, but they could have found a way to like have built him from old Cell data where you had the
Mhm.
memories or something. I mean, they can contrive
They
whatever
could
they
have
want.
done whatever they want. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
like, it was a lot of missed potential. It was all about just they wanted to show off some new transformations for Piccolo and Gohan, but they didn't feel earned. They didn't feel necessary. It just, I don't know, very wasted.
yeah.
Did you care about the two new android superhero brothers?
Nope.
Yeah, they felt, I don't know, they felt the same. I mean, I guess they did have different personalities, but when we make two things look identical, it's a little hard.
I thought their arcs were very bad. The whole aspect of them not realizing they're the bad guys when throughout the thing they know they're capturing a little girl and they know their whole plan is all world domination type stuff and they never realize they're on the bad side the whole time. It's like,
Yeah, it's just convenience for convenience sake. They need to have these conflicts. So, I mean, granted, plenty of movies and shows do that. Like, they don't give characters a chance to talk about what's really happening. Because if they took 5 seconds and talked instead of punch each other, the whole movie would be over. But I do find it interesting that they do get to that point. Like, while they're fighting, they do get to a resolution. So, really, there was no conflict up until the very last moment with Cell being brought back. I don't know. The movie just felt like a waste. And even at the very end, when Cell was there and there was the threat that he'd, go crazy and destroy everything, there didn't really ever feel like a lot of tension there. Like, I remember back in
mhm.
the original shows when, like, they were at the most dire moment, like, either at the end of the Cell saga or end of Boo or whatever, people were seriously concerned that, okay, this is the end and the whole world's gonna get destroyed or whatever. But in this, you got Bulma cracking jokes at the end of Krillin, like while giant red cells, beating Gohan to the ground, holding Piccolo's semi-dead body above his head. It's just, I don't know. That's one thing I feel like Super's done a bad job with in general, barring a couple of arcs. There's no tension to like anything, and maybe it's just because we're all at this point with Dragon Ball that we're like, we know they're not going to kill off main characters. We know it doesn't really matter. There's always a way to bring the Earth back. So maybe tension's kind of a lost, I don't know, feeling in these types of movies or shows, but really didn't feel it here.
I mean, I guess if there is like a thing to kind of like think back on is I'm kind of looking, but to be fair, all of the Dragon Ball Z movies, even though I have a lot of nostalgia for them, not necessarily all of them were great.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe half to 60% of them were really good in my opinion. But they all can't be the world's strongest or Dead Zones or Tree of Might. Those are some of my favorites. Lord Slugs. I mean, you do have Broly. I remember Broly or Bio Broly more in particular was the one I don't remember liking. Um, Shoot, any other I'm seeing in here? I didn't really care for Fusion Reborn, Wrath of the Dragon. Some of the latter ones, in my opinion, weren't that great. But I mean,
A
they
lot of
weren't
the
all
movies
bangers.
have always had an issue because they have to quickly, introduce a brand new enemy and build a
And resolve quick.
conflict. It
Yeah,
can never be anything that's going to have a major impact because it doesn't ever canonically tie back into the show. Or at least, I don't know if canonically is the right word. I don't feel like, were they canonical? I don't think they were. I feel like they were
trying to remember.
offshoot. Even if they were, they couldn't ever have
I
impact on the
think
major storyline.
I think all of them were offshoots. Yes, I
Yeah.
don't remember any of them really tying into anything.
So that makes it tricky, but back then you watched the movies for different reasons too. Like you watched them for those just awesome kind of fantasy fight moments that you would get. And I feel like they did a better job of realizing that. I think because the fight scenes and I'll be honest, the fight scenes in this movie didn't do it for me. Maybe it was the animation style, maybe it was just how the fights were choreographed in it. I don't know, but I don't know. Nothing about this really checked off the boxes I wanted it to check off. Even the
Still say,
transformations, I didn't care about. Did you like giant orange Piccolo?
mm-mm. Not really.
What about super gray-haired Gohan?
He was fine.
But I feel like they that version of Gohan felt really similar to. I know you haven't watched Super here, but like, was it Ultra Instinct Goku they did towards the end of the Super arc? Kind of just felt like that. So it's like
Yeah.
I think they're having a hard time figuring out where to go now. I mean, that's I think the issue you run into with any of this Dragon Ball stuff. You have the power creep, and how do you gauge power levels and show one thing greater than another? It's
I definitely think a lot of the artistic decisions is a lot of the turnoff for Super. For me, like you said, I don't really like some of the new evolutions. I don't like the naming of a lot of the new levels. It,
they're running
we
out of
mentioned it.
just places to go. I think is part of it.
We mentioned it. I mentioned it in the movie. Part of my part of the reason why I loved Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z so much is, yes, I admit it. Even towards the end, they began to lose it, but for the longest time in those shows, you could there was like a given like level set that you could actually like keep track of how powerful
Yeah.
characters were becoming. That was that was done through a lot of the scouter based stuff, and then I'd say towards the latter end of the Cell Saga, you began to kind of lose power levels. Definitely when you got to Majin Buu, people were so much higher than you could calculate. But like, I don't know. I always kind of enjoyed that fact that you could kind of follow and like compare.
Well, it happened
And
too at a certain point, and I know a lot of this happened in Super, but power levels didn't necessarily like because they achieved a new like transformation. It wasn't that that transformation was stronger necessarily than something else. Like they had like think from like different modes almost, and each mode has its own benefit. Like they had different like God modes later on,
hmm
but it was a thing like well you couldn't go into God mode for very long, so it wasn't worth using, or it only did this and that. So it became less about power levels and knowing like which weapon to use at a certain fight. And I don't know, that became hard to keep track of, at least for me, like knowing what each thing meant, when you they should have this power level over another, and I don't know.
and I will say for anyone who, like me, kind of avoided Super, Phoenix said it in the theater, but don't let this be a representation, I guess, of Super, because
I don't think, yeah.
this was a very bad effort in my opinion. Like if this was an accurate representation, I never would go watch Super. But
Here's the thing. It's not like so Super does some of the tropes in here that you may not like are in Super, but I feel like this is all the bad tropes shoved into one thing. Super has some cool stuff in it. I personally, if you watch nothing else in Super, I recommend the Trunks arc. It feels very much like the future Trunks stuff from back in Z. And it's got some dark, atmosphere to it. So if you're into that style, that one felt the most like Dragon Ball Z to me.
that that reminds me so much of GT. Like I know a lot of people don't talk about GT, but like GT was like that for me as well, where like for the most part, most of it wasn't great,
Mm-hmm.
but there was the one arc where I'm like the whole baby saga with Vegeta.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great arc in my opinion. Like once they started getting into a lot of the Shenrons and stuff, that was like way past me. But like GT, in my opinion, if you guys haven't seen, which I don't think many people have gone out of their way to watch GT, but I don't know. Maybe Super's like that. Would you say was there only like really one major arc where you're like that was worth watching?
Yeah, there's fluff in there too, and there's stuff you're not gonna like. I think what makes Super hard too is because the first like half of the entire show is a retelling of those two movies. The was it Resurrection of
Really,
F and
Broly,
the not Broly, the God one where Beerus was introduced.
Battle of the Gods,
Um,
I think it was called.
yeah, that's a Battle of the Gods. They add more to it, and they actually change some things about it, but I had a hard time going back and rewatching those after watching the movie because the big story beats are the same. So honestly, I'd say watch the movies, skip watching the show up to that, and then just watch the Trunk stuff.
Enough. I
Sorry.
mean, I'm trying to think of anything else I have to say, man. This movie was so kind of. It's crazy to think I was very down on it. I was kind of cringing at certain points
I
during the
wouldn't
movie.
waste
I
your
don't.
money to go see this in theater. It's not worth. I mean, theaters are expensive. That was what we're kind of mentioning at the top of this podcast. Is movies are costly. That's why they're going down, and I don't think this is a good reason necessarily to go out. I mean, if you
I
okay,
think it was like $30 for me to watch this movie.
if I think the only way I think this might be worth it is if you have a lot of friends who all just love Dragon Ball, and you can go
Yeah.
there and I don't know, you split a popcorn so it's not, draining your wallet too much, or see it at a theater that maybe is like a matinee. There's fun to be had here if you really gauge your expectations. If all you care about is just, I want to see some Dragon Ball, hang out with friends, sure. But if you want to watch this for a quality Dragon Ball story, wait till it shows up on Crunchyroll. Watch it there.
This reminded me a lot of the first Michael Bay Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie, where we all watched it as a group, like 6 or 7 of us, and I walked away super happy because we all hung out. But then when I thought about the movie, I was like, that wasn't very good.
Yeah, like anything's better with friends. I mean, if you can make a event out of it, you go hang out, sure, it's gonna be a good time. That does not make it a good movie. That was, I think, our issue with Love and Thunder. Like, I had a good time watching it. It was a terrible movie, though. I hated the movie. So same kind of thing here. Don't waste, $30-40 to get a big popcorn, giant drink, best seats in the house kind of thing. Save your money if you can, or at least see a matinee.
Don't help Regal. They'll be fine. They don't need your money.
Some of these theaters do if you want to have it.
Yeah.
Part of me is like, okay, support your theater, but kind of like back to what I was saying earlier, it's not going to matter. Like they're going down. So.
Yeah.